After their father's sudden passing, twin brothers Marcus and Daniel inherit a remote mountain cabin they never knew existed. For 40 years, their father made annual pilgrimages to this place, telling no one where he went or why. The cabin sits deep in the Colorado Rockies, accessible only by a forgotten trail that doesn't appear on any modern map. Inside, they discover something extraordinary. The walls are covered with hand-carved symbols, astronomical charts, and cryptic notations in their father's careful handwriting. Journals span decades, filled with coordinates, sketches of mysterious landmarks, and references to something called the Guardian's Path. Maps detail routes through treacherous terrain leading to locations that shouldn't exist. But what secret was their father protecting all these years that would change everything? They believed about their family? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The drive from Denver took 3 hours, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads until the pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt, then nothing but 2 tire tracks disappearing into dense pine forest. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of their father's old Ford pickup, the same truck that had made this journey 40 times over 4 decades. Daniel studied the hand-drawn map their father had left in the glove compartment, its edges worn soft from handling. According to this, we should hit the trailhead in about 2 miles, Daniel said, squinting at the faded pencil marks. But I don't see any trail markers. Marcus slowed as they approached a barely visible gap between towering evergreens. There, he pointed to a weathered wooden post, so old and grey it nearly blended into the forest. Carved into its surface was a simple symbol, a circle bisected by a vertical line with small marks radiating outward like sun rays. They parked where the road ended and shouldered their packs. The trail was narrow but well maintained, clearly walked regularly despite its remoteness. Pine needles cushioned their steps as they climbed steadily upward, the air growing thinner and colder with each switchback. After 2 hours of hiking, the forest opened into a small clearing where a log cabin sat nestled against a granite cliff face. It was larger than they'd expected, built with the solid craftsmanship of someone who understood mountain weather. Solar panels gleamed on the south-facing roof, and a small wind turbine turned lazily in the afternoon breeze. He lived off the grid up here, Marcus observed, testing the wooden steps leading to the front porch. They creaked, but held firm under his weight. The door was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was immaculate, everything in its place with the precision of a man who spent his life organizing complex expeditions. But it was the walls that stopped them cold. Every surface was covered with maps, charts, photographs, and intricate carvings. Topographical surveys of the surrounding mountains hung beside star charts showing celestial movements across decades. Hand-carved symbols covered the wooden beams, each one precisely cut and darkened with age. Some they recognized as astronomical markers, others resembled Native American petroglyphs, and still others were completely foreign. Daniel approached a large table in the center of the room, where dozens of journals lay open. The leather covers were worn smooth, each one labeled with a year. He picked up the most recent volume and read aloud, "Year 40. The alignment approaches completion. The responsibility grows heavier with each passing season. Soon I must trust them to understand." Marcus was examining a detailed map mounted on the far wall. Unlike commercial topographical surveys, this one showed features that didn't appear on any official documentation. Trails snaked through impossible terrain, connecting locations marked with the same radiating sun symbols they'd seen at the trailhead. Coordinates were penciled in careful handwriting beside each mark. "Daniel, look at this." Marcus pointed to a notation in the corner of the map. "These coordinates, they're not random. They follow a pattern, like they're marking specific viewing positions." On the table beside the journals sat an ornate wooden compass rose, unlike any navigation tool they'd seen before. Instead of traditional directional markings, it bore the same radiating symbols carved throughout the cabin. The wood was dark with age and handling, polished smooth by decades of use. Daniel opened another journal, this one from 20 years earlier. Listen to this. The ancient ones chose these locations for reasons beyond mere convenience. Each site offers unique perspective on the celestial dance above. What they preserved, we must continue to protect. The modern world seeks to exploit what it cannot understand. They spent the afternoon reading through their father's meticulous documentation. Entry after entry revealed a man driven by purpose they'd never suspected. He'd catalogued weather patterns, tracked astronomical events, documented the precise timing of seasonal changes. But more than scientific observation, his writing revealed a deep sense of responsibility, as if he were guardian of something precious and fragile. As evening approached, Marcus lit the wood stove while Daniel continued reading. The cabin filled with warmth and the comfortable smell of burning pine. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains with the swift finality of high-altitude twilight. "Marcus, you need to hear this entry from 15 years ago," Daniel said, his voice quiet with concentration. "Today I met others who share the burden. We are not alone in this guardianship. Across the region, dedicated individuals maintain vigil over sites the ancestors deemed sacred. We call ourselves guardians of the path, though no official organization binds us. Only shared understanding of what we protect." Marcus looked up from the fire. "Guardians of the path, that's what he meant in the inheritance letter." Daniel nodded, turning pages carefully. "There's more. The corporate interests grow bolder each year. They see only resources to extract, land to develop, profits to capture. They cannot comprehend the astronomical significance of these locations, or the cultural heritage they represent. Someone must stand watch. Someone must preserve what cannot be replaced." The twins sat in contemplative silence as darkness deepened outside. Their father's secret life was beginning to reveal itself, layer by careful layer. But with understanding came questions that demanded answers, and a growing sense that inheriting this cabin meant inheriting something far more complex than a simple mountain retreat. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the map-covered walls. Marcus woke first, stoking the embers in the wood stove, while Daniel continued sleeping in their father's narrow bunk. The mountain silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine branches and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Over coffee brewed on the old camp stove, they returned to their father's journals with fresh eyes. Daniel spread a hand-drawn topographical map across the table, its edges reinforced with careful tape repairs. Unlike the wall-mounted survey, this one was clearly meant for field use. Pencil notations covered its surface, with elevation markers, compass bearings, and estimated travel times between locations. "This isn't just exploration," Daniel said, tracing a route with his finger. "This is systematic mapping. Look how he's documented water sources, shelter locations, even seasonal trail conditions." Marcus studied the legend their father had created in the map's corner. Symbols marked different types of locations: circles for astronomical observation sites, triangles for shelter points, squares for what he'd labeled cultural markers. A dotted line connected them all, forming a complex route through terrain that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. "Here's something interesting," Marcus said, pointing to a series of small symbols scattered across the map. "These look like the petroglyphs we saw in his photographs yesterday." Daniel nodded, pulling out a journal from 3 decades earlier. "He writes about them here. The ancient symbols match perfectly with the astronomical alignments. These weren't random carvings. Each one marks a specific viewing angle for celestial events. Solar equinoxes, lunar phases, planetary alignments. The precision is remarkable." They studied the map more carefully, beginning to understand the sophisticated knowledge it represented. Their father hadn't just been hiking through beautiful mountain scenery. He'd been following paths laid down by people who understood the sky in ways that modern society had largely forgotten. A loose sheet of paper tucked between the map's folds caught Daniel's attention. It was covered with their father's handwriting, but the tone was different from his usual methodical observations. This was urgent, almost worried, development pressure increasing. Mineral surveys conducted last spring near Sacred Ridge site. Corporate interests growing bolder. May need to accelerate timeline for succession planning. Marcus, look at this date, Daniel said. This was written only 6 months ago. Marcus read over his shoulder, his expression growing serious. Succession planning. He was preparing to pass this responsibility to someone else. They spent the morning cross-referencing the map with journal entries, slowly piecing together the scope of their father's work. The trail system connected 12 major sites across a 50-mile radius of wilderness. Each location had been visited regularly, documented thoroughly, and maintained carefully. Weather data, astronomical observations, photographic records, even sketches of seasonal plant growth patterns. But it was more than scientific documentation. Interspersed with the data were references to other people. Met with Sarah at Granite Point, wildfire damage worse than reported. Tom confirms mining survey equipment spotted near Echo Canyon. Network meeting scheduled for autumn equinox. He wasn't working alone, Daniel realized. This network he mentioned, they've been coordinating protection efforts across the entire region. Marcus found a detailed sketch of symbols their father had copied from various sites. Some were clearly astronomical, showing star patterns and celestial movements. Others resembled the pottery designs they'd seen in museums dedicated to ancient southwestern cultures. But scattered among the familiar symbols were markings that seemed entirely unique, as if their father had discovered something previously unknown. Look at this notation, Marcus said, pointing to writing beneath one of the symbol sketches. The Watchers maintained vigil here for centuries before European contact. Their knowledge of sky movements exceeded anything recorded in academic literature. These sites preserve astronomical information that could revolutionize our understanding of pre-Columbian science. Daniel pulled out another journal, this one dedicated entirely to what their father called cultural documentation. Page after page contained careful reproductions of petroglyphs, detailed measurements of stone alignments, and hypotheses about the astronomical knowledge they represented. He wasn't just protecting hiking trails, Daniel said quietly. He was preserving irreplaceable archaeological and astronomical sites. The implications were becoming clear. Their father had stumbled onto something significant during his early mountain explorations, then spent 4 decades learning about it, documenting it, and working with others to protect it from commercial exploitation. The annual trips weren't recreational hiking. They were maintenance missions, scientific observations, and guardian duties rolled into one. Marcus studied the map again, noting how the marked sites formed a rough circle around a central location labeled simply as primary. No coordinates were given for this site, but the map suggested it lay another day's hike deeper into the wilderness. He left us a trail to follow, Marcus said. Every symbol, every notation, every journal entry, it's all building towards something, Daniel nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. He was training us without our knowledge. All those camping trips when we were kids, the astronomy lessons, teaching us to read topographical maps and use a compass. He was preparing us for this. Outside, clouds were building over the peaks, promising afternoon thunderstorms. Inside the cabin, 2 brothers sat surrounded by their father's life work, beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd passed to them. They left the cabin at dawn, following the dotted line on their father's map toward the first marked site. Daniel carried the hand-drawn chart, while Marcus shouldered their father's well-worn pack, surprised by its weight. Inside, they discovered an intricate wooden medallion, carved with directional markings, unlike any compass they'd seen. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with tiny symbols etched around its circumference, and a center point that seemed to spin freely on hidden bearings. The trail began as a clear path but quickly dissolved into what appeared to be natural deer tracks winding through dense undergrowth. Marcus checked the compass rose frequently, trying to understand how its unusual markings corresponded to the terrain around them. The traditional north, south, east, west directions were there, but surrounded by symbols that seemed to indicate something else entirely. According to the map, we should be looking for a lightning-struck pine about a mile up this ridge, Daniel said. Pausing to catch his breath in the thin mountain air, they found it exactly where their father had marked it. A massive ponderosa with a spiraling scar running down its trunk from crown to roots. Carved into the bark at eye level was the same radiating sun symbol they'd seen throughout the cabin. There, Marcus pointed to a barely visible trail branching off toward a granite outcropping. The path continues. What followed was some of the most challenging hiking either brother had experienced. Their father's route didn't follow established trails or logical contours. Instead, it led through narrow rock passages, across unstable scree fields, and up cliff faces that required careful hand and foot climbing. Yet everywhere they looked, subtle markers confirmed they were following the intended path. Stacked stones at crucial decision points, symbols scratched into rock faces, even occasional metal stakes driven into crack systems to provide handholds. He maintained all of this, Daniel said, examining a section of fixed rope their father had installed to aid passage across a particularly exposed traverse. For 40 years, he came up here and kept this route accessible. The physical demands of the terrain began to shift their understanding of their father. They'd known him as a quiet man who enjoyed weekend camping trips and backyard stargazing. But this route required serious mountaineering skills, route-finding expertise, and a level of physical conditioning they'd never associated with him. 3 hours into the hike, they reached what their father's map designated as First Camp. It was a natural shelter formed by massive boulders, with a fire ring built from carefully selected stones, and a small cache of emergency supplies hidden in a waterproof container. The site offered spectacular views across the valley below, but more importantly, it provided an unobstructed view of the eastern sky. Marcus unpacked the compass rose and set it on a flat rock, watching how its mysterious symbols aligned with the landscape features around them. Slowly, he began to understand. The markings weren't just directional indicators. They were astronomical orientation points. "Daniel, look at this," he called his brother over. "If you align this symbol with that distinctive peak to the east, and this one with the gap between those two ridges, it creates sight lines for tracking celestial movement." Daniel studied the arrangement, beginning to see the pattern. It's like a surveying instrument, but designed for astronomy instead of mapping. They spent the afternoon exploring the immediate area around First Camp, discovering features their father had documented but they'd missed on first glance. Stone alignments that marked specific horizon points, carefully cleared sight lines through tree growth, even a series of small cairns that formed a precise geometric pattern when viewed from above. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Their father hadn't just found these locations, he'd enhanced them, improved them, maintained them year after year. The work represented decades of careful observation and gradual refinement. As evening approached, they made camp in the same spot their father had used countless times before. The fire ring showed evidence of regular use, and Marcus found himself wondering how many nights their father had sat in this exact location, studying the stars and recording his observations. He never talked about being interested in astronomy beyond basic stargazing, Daniel said. Stirring their simple dinner over the camp stove, Marcus nodded, consulting their father's journals by headlamp light. But listen to this entry from 15 years ago. The autumn equinox alignment confirmed ancient calculations with remarkable precision. The knowledge preserved at these sites demonstrates sophistication far beyond what conventional archaeology acknowledges. We are guardians of scientific heritage that could rewrite textbooks. The night sky at this elevation was spectacular, unmarred by light pollution and crystal clear in the thin air. Using their father's compass, rose, and star charts, they began to understand how the site functioned as an astronomical observation platform. The horizon markers aligned perfectly with rising points of significant stars. The stone arrangements framed key portions of the sky during important celestial events. They were following more than a hiking trail. They were tracing the footsteps of someone who discovered something extraordinary and spent his life protecting it. The second day brought them deeper into wilderness that seemed untouched by modern influence. Following their father's map, they climbed steadily through terrain that alternated between dense forest and exposed granite faces. At a rest stop beside a mountain stream, Daniel discovered something that made him call Marcus over immediately. Tucked beneath a natural rock overhang was a small weather monitoring station, so carefully camouflaged it was nearly invisible. Solar panels, no larger than paperbacks, powered instruments that recorded temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind patterns. A data logger contained years of measurements, all meticulously organized and labeled. He was conducting scientific research up here, Daniel said, examining the precise calibration markings on each instrument. This isn't amateur weather watching. This is professional-grade environmental monitoring. Marcus found a waterproof notebook attached to the station containing handwritten logs that corresponded to the electronic data. But their father's observations went beyond simple weather recording. He documented correlations between atmospheric conditions and astronomical visibility, tracking how mountain weather patterns affected celestial observation opportunities. "Look at these entries," Marcus said, reading from the notebook. Ideal viewing conditions occur during high-pressure systems following storm passage. Atmospheric clarity peaks approximately 18 hours after precipitation ends. Ancient observers would have understood these patterns intimately. They discovered more weather stations as they continued along the trail, each one positioned at a location their father had marked as significant. The data collection was systematic and comprehensive, revealing someone who understood the critical relationship between weather patterns and astronomical observation. But it was more than scientific curiosity driving the meticulous documentation. Scattered through the weather logs were concerned notes about changing patterns, spring snowmelt occurring 3 weeks earlier than historical average, storm intensity increasing, threatening site stability, extended drought periods affecting vegetation growth around observation points. He was documenting climate change impacts on these sites, Daniel realized, not just for scientific interest, but because environmental changes threatened whatever he was protecting. The trail led them to their second overnight location, which their father had designated as Weather Station Alpha on his maps. Unlike the previous night's natural shelter, this site had been significantly modified. A stone wind barrier provided protection from prevailing mountain breezes, and a carefully leveled observation platform offered 360-degree views of the surrounding peaks. Most remarkably, they found evidence that this location had been used for weather observation long before their father's involvement. Ancient stone alignments marked wind direction patterns, and petroglyphs carved into nearby rock faces depicted weather symbols that matched meteorological phenomena there. Father had documented in his modern instruments. The indigenous observers weren't just watching the stars, Marcus said, studying the petroglyphs by flashlight. They were tracking weather patterns too, probably for agricultural timing, hunting seasons, all kinds of practical applications. Daniel was examining their father's most recent weather logs, dating from just months before his death. The entries showed increasing concern about threats to the monitoring network. Mining survey teams spotted near station. Beta, equipment vulnerability. Requires relocation planning. Corporate. Weather monitoring detected in Sector 7. Our data collection may be compromised. They spent the evening reviewing decades of weather data their father had compiled, beginning to understand the scope of his scientific contribution. The high-altitude observations filled gaps in regional climate records, providing valuable baseline data for understanding environmental changes in alpine ecosystems. But the data revealed something else troubling. Recent entries showed accelerating environmental pressures that went beyond natural climate variation. Industrial activity in the valleys below was affecting air quality at observation sites. Mining exploration was disrupting watershed patterns that had remained stable for centuries. He wasn't just preserving astronomical sites, Daniel said, reviewing correlation charts their father had created. He was documenting environmental degradation that threatened an entire ecosystem. Marcus found a folder containing correspondence with university researchers who'd been using their father's weather data for climate studies. The letters revealed a scientist whose work was respected in academic circles, even though he published under the modest title of independent researcher. As they prepared their camp for the night, mountain weather demonstrated the patterns their father had spent decades studying. Afternoon thunderclouds built rapidly over the peaks, bringing brief but intense precipitation before clearing to reveal spectacular star visibility. The timing matched their father's predictions exactly. Tomorrow we reach what he called the cultural interface zone, Daniel said, studying the map by headlamp light. His notes suggest that's where we'll start finding the most significant archaeological features. Marcus nodded, watching lightning flash between distant peaks. And where we'll understand why someone would spend 40 years protecting places like this. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving air so clear they could see individual craters on the moon's surface. Using their father's weather data and astronomical charts, they began to appreciate the sophisticated knowledge required to predict optimal observation conditions in such a dynamic mountain environment. They were following the footsteps of someone who'd mastered both ancient wisdom and modern science, combining traditional knowledge with contemporary research methods to protect something irreplaceable. The third day's hike brought them to terrain that felt fundamentally different from anything they'd experienced. The forest thinned into scattered groves, separated by meadows dotted with ancient granite formations, each one seeming deliberately placed despite their obvious natural origin. Their father's map marked this area simply as the interface. But his journal entries had prepared them for something significant. They found the first petroglyphs shortly after noon, carved into a south-facing rock wall that caught maximum sunlight throughout the day. The symbols were extensive and clearly very old, weathered but still distinct against the granite surface. What made them extraordinary was their obvious astronomical content. Star maps, lunar phase cycles, and solar pathway diagrams covered the rock face in organized arrangements that suggested sophisticated mathematical understanding. These matched the sketches in Dad's journals exactly, Daniel said, comparing the carved symbols to their father's careful reproductions. But seeing them in person, the scale is incredible. Marcus was studying a large circular carving that dominated the center of the rock wall. It showed concentric rings marked with precise divisions, like a massive calendar wheel. Radiating lines connected specific points on the circles to horizon features visible from the site, creating sight lines that aligned with astronomical events. It's a stone calendar, Marcus realized. But not just for tracking days or seasons. Look at these markings. They're calculating celestial cycles that span decades, maybe centuries. Daniel found their father's documentation of this particular site in a journal dedicated entirely to what he called cultural astronomy. Page after page contained detailed measurements, photographic records, and increasingly excited observations about the sophistication of the ancient knowledge preserved here. Listen to this entry from 10 years ago, Daniel read aloud. The precision is undeniable. These calculations predict astronomical events with accuracy that rivals modern computer models. The people who created these records possessed mathematical and observational capabilities that challenge every assumption about pre-Columbian science in North America. They spent hours examining the petroglyphs, using their father's notes to understand the complex information encoded in stone. Some carvings tracked the 18-year cycle of lunar eclipses. Others mapped the precession of equinoxes across centuries. Most remarkably, several panels appeared to document rare astronomical phenomena like planetary alignments and comet appearances. Dad wasn't exaggerating about rewriting textbooks, Marcus said, photographing a series of symbols that their father had identified as records of a supernova event. If these calculations are accurate, they represent astronomical knowledge that academic archaeology insists didn't exist in this region. But the petroglyphs were only part of what made the site extraordinary. The granite formations themselves had been modified in subtle but sophisticated ways. Stone alignments created precise viewing angles for tracking celestial movements. Natural depressions had been enhanced to form collecting pools that reflected star positions. Even the vegetation seemed to have been managed to maintain clear sightlines to specific horizon points. "This isn't just a place where ancient people observed the sky," Daniel said, understanding dawning. "It's an astronomical observatory built to function for centuries." Their father's journals revealed that he'd spent years studying the site, gradually understanding how its various components worked together. The petroglyphs provided calculation methods and historical records. The stone alignments enabled precise measurements. The modified landscape features created optimal observation conditions. Most importantly, the site was still functional. Following their father's instructions, they waited until evening to see the calendar stone in action. As sunset approached, shadow lines cast by carefully positioned rocks began moving across the carved surface, highlighting specific symbols and calculations. "The shadows are marking today's date," Marcus said in amazement, watching the interplay of light and stone. After centuries of weather and environmental change, it's still keeping accurate time. Daniel consulted their father's astronomical predictions for the current date. According to his calculations, tonight would offer optimal viewing conditions for several planets and a minor meteor shower. As darkness fell, the sky performed exactly as the ancient calendar had predicted. "Now I understand why Dad called them the Watchers," Daniel said, watching Jupiter rise precisely where the stone alignments indicated it would appear. They weren't just observing random astronomical events. They were maintaining a systematic scientific record that spanned generations. Their father's latest journal entries about this site revealed growing concern about its vulnerability. Mining surveys had been conducted in the adjacent valley. Corporate representatives had been asking questions about access routes through the area. Local authorities had received proposals for adventure tourism development that would bring crowds of visitors to previously protected locations. The commercial pressure is intensifying. Marcus read from their father's final entries about the site. These irreplaceable scientific and cultural resources could be destroyed by industrial development or damaged by uncontrolled public access. The network must accelerate protection efforts before opportunities are lost forever. As they made camp near the ancient observatory, both brothers understood they were sleeping beside something that represented far more than historical curiosity. They were in the presence of sophisticated scientific knowledge that had been preserved through centuries of careful guardianship, and that guardianship had now passed to them. The fourth morning found them studying their father's most detailed astronomical documentation yet, a collection of star charts that spanned 40 years of observations from multiple sites along the trail. Each chart was hand-drawn with meticulous precision, showing not just star positions but seasonal variations, atmospheric effects, and optimal viewing times for specific celestial events. "These aren't amateur sketches," Daniel said, examining a chart that tracked Mars' retrograde motion across 18 months of observations. "This is professional-quality astronomical documentation." Marcus was learning to use their father's star charts in combination with the ancient stone calendar from the previous site. The two systems complemented each other perfectly. The prehistoric calculations provided long-term astronomical cycles, while their father's modern observations offered detailed timing for current events. Following the trail deeper into the mountains, They discovered that each major site along the route was positioned to take advantage of specific astronomical viewing opportunities. Their father's notes revealed that he'd gradually understood the sophisticated logic behind the ancient placement decisions. The original observers weren't randomly choosing scenic locations. Marcus read from a journal entry. Each site offers optimal conditions for different types of celestial observation. Some are positioned for planetary tracking, others for lunar studies, still others for deep sky phenomena like meteor showers and aurora displays. They reached the next significant site just as afternoon clouds began building over the peaks. Their father had designated this location as Primary Horizon Station, and his charts showed why. The site sat on a natural platform with unobstructed 360-degree views, allowing simultaneous observation of all quadrants of the sky. But what made it truly remarkable was the collection of stone markers that surrounded the observation platform. Dozens of carefully placed rocks marked specific horizon points where important stars and planets rose and set throughout the year. Their father's documentation showed that these markers had been refined and maintained for centuries, with periodic adjustments to account for slow changes in Earth's axial tilt. "It's like a giant outdoor planetarium," Daniel said, using their father's charts to identify which horizon markers corresponded to which celestial objects. But built to function for generations, their father's latest observations from this site revealed astronomical events that the ancient calculations had predicted with remarkable accuracy. Planetary alignments, lunar eclipses, even the appearance of periodic comets matched the stone calendar predictions exactly. As evening approached, they experienced the site's astronomical capabilities firsthand. Following their father's observation protocols, they positioned themselves at the center of the stone marker system and watched the sky come alive. One by one, stars appeared exactly where the horizon markers indicated they would, rising and setting in the precise patterns the ancient observers had calculated. This level of accuracy required generations of careful observation, Marcus said, watching Venus appear precisely where a carved symbol on one of the markers indicated it would, and mathematical sophistication to calculate the complex cycles involved. Daniel was reading their father's analysis of the knowledge represented at the site. He estimates it would have taken at least 3 centuries of continuous observation to develop these calculation methods. This represents the work of dozens of skilled astronomers across multiple generations. But their father's recent entries revealed troubling developments that threatened the entire observation network. Commercial satellite launches were increasing light pollution even in remote mountain areas. Mining operations in distant valleys were creating atmospheric disturbances that affected visibility conditions. Most seriously, proposed development projects would eliminate the dark sky conditions essential for astronomical observation. Listen to this from 6 months ago, Daniel read. Light pollution from proposed resort development would render these sites useless for astronomical observation. Centuries of scientific heritage could be destroyed by a few years of commercial exploitation. The network must take action to establish formal protection status before opportunities are lost. Their father's star charts showed that he'd been documenting the gradual degradation of viewing conditions at observation sites across the region. What had once been pristine dark sky locations was slowly being compromised by expanding human activity in surrounding areas. He wasn't just preserving historical sites, Marcus realized. He was trying to maintain functional astronomical observation capabilities that represent irreplaceable scientific resources. As full darkness fell, they experienced the kind of sky visibility that had made the ancient observations possible. Without light pollution, the Milky Way blazed overhead with startling clarity. Planets shone like brilliant jewels among thousands of visible stars. The aurora borealis danced across the northern horizon, exactly as their father's predictions had indicated, Using the ancient stone markers and their father's modern charts together, they began to understand how the two systems formed a complete astronomical toolkit. The prehistoric calculations provided the theoretical framework, while contemporary observations offered precise timing and atmospheric data. "We're not just inheriting hiking trails and camping sites," Daniel said, watching a predicted meteor streak across the constellation Cassiopeia. "We're becoming guardians of active, scientific installations that have been operating for centuries." The night sky above them held the same stars that countless previous generations had studied from this exact location, maintaining an unbroken chain of astronomical observation that now depended on them for continuation. On their fifth day, the twins encountered their first living connection to their father's secret world. They were following a particularly challenging section of trail when they spotted another hiker approaching from the opposite direction. In this remote wilderness, meeting anyone was unusual, but the elderly woman moved with the confident pace of someone intimately familiar with the terrain. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair tied back and weathered hands that spoke of decades spent outdoors. What caught their attention immediately was the small metal pin on her backpack strap, bearing the same radiating sun symbol they'd seen throughout their father's documentation. "You must be Robert's sons," she said without preamble, setting down her pack at a natural rest spot. "I'm Sarah Whitehorse. Your father and I worked together for 15 years. Daniel showed her their father's journals, and her face softened with recognition. "He wrote about you both constantly, always worried about how to explain what he was protecting, always hoping you'd understand when the time came." Sarah unpacked a small badge from her kit, identical to the symbol pin, but made of carved bone rather than metal. The craftsmanship was clearly ancient, with wear patterns that suggested it had been handled by many people across many years. "This was your father's," she said, placing it in Marcus's hands. "It's been passed down through the Guardian network for over a century. Each person who carries one has sworn to protect the astronomical sites from exploitation or destruction." The badge felt warm in Marcus's palm, smooth from generations of handling. Around its edge were tiny symbols that matched the astronomical markers they'd seen at observation sites throughout their journey. "How many Guardians are there?" Daniel asked. Sarah smiled. "More than you might expect, fewer than we need. We're scattered across the mountain west, each responsible for sites in our region. Some are retired professors, others are professional guides. A few are tribal elders who inherited the knowledge from their ancestors. What unites us is understanding that these places represent irreplaceable scientific and cultural heritage." She explained how the informal network had developed over decades, as different people independently discovered the astronomical significance of ancient sites and began working to protect them. Their father had been instrumental in connecting isolated individuals into a coordinated preservation effort. "Robert was our historian and our strategist," Sarah continued. "He documented everything, built relationships with academic researchers, and developed legal strategies for establishing protection status. Most importantly, he understood that the network needed succession planning." Marcus examined the Guardian badge more closely, noting how its symbols corresponded to astronomical features they'd observed at various sites. "Why the secrecy? Why not work through official channels?" Sarah's expression grew serious. "Because official channels move slowly and commercial interests move fast. By the time bureaucratic protection process is complete, significant sites can be destroyed by mining, development, or uncontrolled tourism. We provide immediate protection while working toward formal recognition." She showed them correspondence between network members, revealing a sophisticated communication system that coordinated protection efforts across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Each Guardian maintained detailed records of threats and activities in their area, sharing information that helped the network respond to emerging dangers. "Your father's sector includes 12 major sites and dozens of supporting locations," Sarah explained, pointing to features on their map. It's one of the most concentrated and scientifically significant areas we protect. Losing it would be catastrophic for our understanding of prehistoric astronomy in North America. Daniel asked about the current threats their father had mentioned in his recent journals. Sarah's response was sobering. Corporate mineral surveys had identified valuable deposits near several protected sites. Development pressure from expanding resort communities was encroaching on buffer zones that maintained dark sky conditions. Most concerning, recent political changes had weakened environmental protection laws that provided legal backing for preservation efforts. The window for establishing formal protection is closing, Sarah said. We need to accelerate our timeline, present stronger documentation, and build broader public support. That's why Robert was so concerned about succession planning. The network needs younger people who can adapt to changing conditions. She spent the afternoon teaching them guardian protocols they'd need to continue their father's work. Communication methods for coordinating with other network members. Documentation standards for recording threats and preservation activities. Legal procedures for challenging development proposals that endangered protected sites. Most importantly, she explained the philosophy that guided guardian work. We're not trying to prevent all human access to these places. We're trying to ensure that access happens in ways that preserve their scientific value and cultural significance. Some sites can accommodate small numbers of serious researchers or respectful visitors. Others are too fragile and must remain completely protected. As evening approached, Sarah prepared to continue her own patrol route. Before leaving, she formally welcomed the twins into the Guardian network, explaining that carrying their father's badge made them responsible for everything he had protected. The sites choose their guardians as much as we choose them, she said, shouldering her pack. Your father knew you'd understand when you were ready. That readiness appears to be now. The twins' understanding of their father's work took on new urgency the following morning when they discovered fresh evidence of the threats Sarah had described. Following their father's map toward what he'd marked as sacred ridge, they encountered survey stakes driven into the ground along what had previously been an untouched wilderness trail. Bright orange flagging tape marked a geometric grid pattern that extended far into the forest, clearly indicating some type of systematic exploration. Marcus pulled one of the stakes from the ground, revealing corporate markings that identified Consolidated Mineral Resources as the survey contractor. This wasn't here when Dad made his last trip, Daniel said, checking the date on their father's final journal entries about this area. These surveys started after his death. They followed the survey markers deeper into what their father's maps designated as culturally sensitive areas. The stakes led directly toward astronomical observation sites that had remained hidden and protected for decades. Worse, some markers had been placed within yards of ancient petroglyphs and stone alignments, hidden in a waterproof container near one of the survey stakes. They found corporate documents that revealed the scope of the mineral exploration project. The paperwork detailed a proposed copper mining operation that would require access roads, equipment staging areas, and ore processing facilities across thousands of acres of currently protected wilderness. The development plans made devastating reading. Proposed access roads would cut directly through several astronomical observation sites. Equipment staging areas were planned for locations that provided essential dark sky conditions. Most catastrophic, the main ore processing facility was proposed for construction on the exact site of the ancient stone calendar they'd visited days earlier. They have no idea what they're planning to destroy, Marcus said, studying aerial photographs included in the development proposal. Or maybe they know and don't care. Daniel found additional documentation showing that the mineral exploration had been coordinated with local government. Officials who seemed unaware of the astronomical and archaeological significance of the targeted areas. Permits had been issued based on standard environmental assessments that completely missed the scientific value of the sites. Dad was fighting this, Daniel realized. reading notations their father had made in the margins of similar documents found in his cabin. These are the corporate interests he mentioned in his journals. Their father's research revealed a pattern of strategic development pressure designed to overwhelm conservation efforts through multiple simultaneous projects. While preservationists focused on protecting one threatened area, mining and development interests would advance on several others. The strategy was effective because each individual project seemed small, but collectively they would fragment the entire network of protected sites. The corporate documents also revealed something more troubling. The mineral surveys had been accompanied by detailed photography of archaeological features, suggesting that someone understood the scientific value of what they were planning to destroy. Rather than avoiding culturally significant areas, the development plans seemed deliberately designed to eliminate them. "This isn't accidental," Marcus said, examining photographs that showed precise documentation of petroglyph sites and astronomical alignments. "Someone wants these places destroyed." They discovered that the immediate threat was even more urgent than their father's final journals had indicated. Construction permits for the first phase of development had already been approved. Groundbreaking was scheduled to begin within 6 weeks, starting with access road construction that would bisect the ancient observation network. The twins spent the afternoon documenting evidence of the impending destruction, photographing survey stakes positioned directly adjacent to irreplaceable archaeological features. They found markers indicating where explosives would be used to create road cuts through solid granite, including sections that contained extensive petroglyph panels. "We need to contact the other Guardians immediately," Daniel said, understanding the scope of the emergency they faced. But as they prepared to leave the area, they discovered they weren't alone in the wilderness. Fresh tire tracks led to a hidden observation post where someone had been monitoring activities around the threatened sites. Cigarette butts and food containers suggested recent occupation, and powerful binoculars left behind indicated systematic surveillance. More disturbing, they found evidence that their own movements had been tracked. Footprints matching their hiking patterns had been photographed and marked with survey flags, suggesting that their presence in the area was known to whoever was conducting the surveillance. "Someone's been watching us," Marcus said, examining the observation post carefully, "and they know we're following Dad's route." Daniel discovered a radio frequency list that included communication channels used by the Guardian network, indicating that their supposedly secure coordination methods had been compromised. The surveillance wasn't random security for a mining operation. It was targeted intelligence gathering about preservation activities. As they hurried back towards safer terrain, both brothers understood that inheriting their father's work meant inheriting his enemies as well. The corporate interests threatening the astronomical sites weren't just planning environmental destruction. They were actively working to eliminate the people who stood in their way. The Guardian badge in Marcus's pocket felt heavier as they realized they were now targets in a conflict their father had fought quietly for years, a conflict that was about to become very public and very dangerous. The twins reached cellular coverage the next afternoon and immediately contacted Sarah using the communication protocols she'd taught them. Within hours, they found themselves at a backcountry rendezvous point where 5 other Guardians had gathered in response to the emergency. The meeting location was a natural amphitheater hidden deep in national forest land, chosen for its security and symbolic significance as a traditional council site. Each Guardian carried with them a collection of coded messages that revealed the sophisticated communication network their father had helped establish. The system used a combination of encrypted radio frequencies, dead-drop locations, and digital steganography that hid messages within innocent-looking photographs posted to social media accounts. "Your father designed most of these protocols," explained Tom Brightfeather, a Navajo elder whose knowledge of traditional astronomy had made him invaluable to the network. He understood that our preservation work would eventually attract hostile attention from commercial interests. The Guardians shared intelligence that painted a troubling picture of coordinated attacks on protected sites across the entire region. The mining proposal, threatening their father's sites, was just one element of a larger strategy designed to break up the network by overwhelming individual Guardians with simultaneous crises. Dr. Maria Santos, a retired geology professor who protected sites in southern Colorado, brought documentation showing similar mineral surveys near her areas of responsibility. The same corporate shell companies are involved in all the projects. This isn't multiple independent development proposals. It's a coordinated campaign. James Mitchell, a former Park Service ranger who'd become a Guardian after discovering astronomical sites during his official duties, had intercepted communications that revealed even more disturbing information. They know about us. They have our names, our areas of responsibility, even details about our personal lives. This surveillance operation has been running for months. The coded messages the Guardians shared contained detailed intelligence about corporate activities, legal strategies, and political pressure being applied to weaken environmental protection laws. But they also revealed the network's capabilities, which were far more extensive than the twins had realized. We have allies in academia, government agencies, tribal councils, and environmental organizations, Sarah explained, showing them a complex organizational chart their father had maintained. What we lack is legal standing to challenge development projects directly. We're not official organizations, so our objections carry limited weight in regulatory proceedings. The network had been working for years to build the documentation necessary to establish formal protection for the astronomical sites. Their father's meticulous scientific records were crucial to this effort, providing the kind of peer-reviewed research that could support legal protection arguments. Robert's work is the foundation for everything we're trying to accomplish, Tom said, examining the twins' photographs of the recent survey activities. His documentation proves these sites represent genuine scientific resources that merit protection under existing archaeological and environmental laws. But the coded messages also revealed that time was running out. Political pressure from mining interests was accelerating regulatory timelines, reducing the period available for public comment and environmental review. Several protection proposals that had been working through official channels for years were suddenly facing expedited approval processes that would eliminate opportunities for meaningful opposition. They're trying to push everything through before we can mount effective legal challenges, Dr. Santos explained. The strategy is to create facts on the ground that become irreversible even if we eventually win in court. The Guardians had developed contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Hidden throughout their communication network were detailed legal briefs, scientific studies, and media packages prepared by allied organizations. If development threats reached critical stages, the network could rapidly deploy coordinated responses across multiple fronts. We call it the Revelation Protocol, James explained. Instead of fighting each threat individually, we go public with everything simultaneously. Full disclosure of the archaeological significance, the astronomical importance, the corporate connections, the political pressure. We make it impossible for officials to claim ignorance. The twins learned that their father had been the primary architect of this strategy, understanding that the network's secretive approach, while necessary for initial protection, would eventually need to give way to public advocacy. His death had accelerated the timeline for implementing the Revelation Protocol. Robert was preparing to go public with his research when he died, Sarah said quietly. He'd completed the scientific documentation, secured academic endorsements, and developed media relationships. We inherited a complete campaign strategy that just needed implementation. The coded messages revealed that other Guardians had been making similar preparations in their areas. University researchers were ready to publish papers validating the astronomical significance of protected sites. Environmental lawyers had prepared legal challenges to development permits. Indigenous rights advocates had documented cultural connections to threatened areas. The network your father built isn't just about preserving individual sites, Tom explained. It's about changing how society understands the scientific and cultural value of these places. We're trying to create a new category of protected status that recognizes astronomical heritage. As evening fell over the council site, the Guardians reached consensus on implementing the Revelation Protocol within days rather than months. The immediate threats to the twins' inherited sites would trigger coordinated public disclosure across the entire network, transforming decades of quiet preservation work into a visible political campaign. Back at their father's cabin, the twins spent the next 3 days immersed in legal documents that revealed the sophisticated strategy their father had developed for protecting the astronomical sites. Hidden in a fireproof safe they'd overlooked during their initial exploration, they discovered folders containing years of careful preparation for exactly the crisis they now faced. The centerpiece of their father's legal strategy was a comprehensive portfolio documenting the scientific significance of each protected site. Academic researchers from major universities had contributed peer-reviewed studies validating the astronomical accuracy of ancient calculations. Archaeological surveys confirmed the age and authenticity of petroglyphs and stone alignments. Environmental impact assessments demonstrated how proposed development would destroy irreplaceable scientific resources. He wasn't just collecting interesting information, Daniel said. Reviewing legal briefs their father had commissioned from environmental law firms. He was building a case that could hold up in federal court. The legal documents revealed how their father had identified weaknesses in the regulatory processes being used to approve development projects. Environmental assessments required for mining permits had failed to identify archaeological resources because they relied on outdated surveys that predated recent discoveries. Cultural impact reviews had been conducted without consulting tribal authorities who possessed traditional knowledge about the sites. Marcus found correspondence with Native American legal advocates who had agreed to support protection efforts based on their father's documentation of cultural connections to the astronomical sites. Tribal councils from across the region had passed resolutions supporting preservation, providing crucial legal standing that individual guardians lacked. The tribal support changes everything, Marcus realized. Reading legal opinions that explained how indigenous cultural rights created powerful protection arguments. These aren't just scientific sites. They're sacred places with active cultural significance. Their father's legal research had identified precedent, cases where similar sites had received protection through coordination between scientific and cultural preservation arguments. The key was demonstrating that astronomical observation sites represented living cultural traditions rather than merely historical artifacts. But the legal documents also revealed the sophistication of the opposition they faced. Corporate legal teams had been systematically challenging environmental protection laws, creating favorable precedents for development projects in sensitive areas. Political pressure had resulted in regulatory changes that reduced protection standards and accelerated approval timelines. They've been planning this campaign for years, Daniel said, examining corporate legal strategies their father had obtained through Freedom of Information requests. The mining proposals aren't opportunistic. They're part of a coordinated effort to eliminate environmental obstacles to resource extraction. The twins discovered that their father had anticipated this exact scenario, developing contingency plans for rapid legal response to development threats. Pre-written injunction requests were ready for immediate filing. Media packages containing compelling photographs and scientific documentation were prepared for public release. Coalition letters signed by supporting organizations were waiting for activation. Most importantly, their father had secured commitments from environmental organizations with significant legal resources and political influence. Groups like the Sierra Club, Wilderness Society, and Archaeological Conservancy had agreed to provide immediate support if threats to the astronomical sites reached critical levels. He built an entire campaign infrastructure, Marcus said, reviewing organizational charts that showed how different groups would coordinate their efforts. Legal challenges, media advocacy, political pressure, scientific validation, everything needed to mount effective opposition. The legal documents included detailed timelines showing exactly when various protection strategies needed to be implemented to have maximum impact. Court filings had to precede groundbreaking by specific intervals to obtain restraining orders. Media campaigns needed coordination with legislative sessions to influence political decision-making. Scientific papers required publication schedules that aligned with regulatory review periods. The Revelation Protocol the Guardians mentioned isn't just about going public, Daniel realized. It's about launching a precisely timed legal and political campaign designed to create maximum pressure at the exact moment when decisions are being made. Let their father's strategy recognize that preservation efforts had to operate simultaneously on multiple levels. While lawyers filed court challenges and scientists published research papers, grassroots advocates would mobilize public opinion and political pressure. The combination would be far more effective than any single approach. As they studied their father's legal preparations, both brothers understood that inheriting his work meant accepting responsibility for implementing a complex campaign that required careful coordination and precise timing. The corporate threats were immediate and well-funded, but their father had provided tools for effective resistance. We're not just inheriting responsibility for protecting these sites, Marcus said, reviewing legal documents that authorized them to act on behalf of the Guardian Network. We're inheriting a complete strategy for winning a battle Dad spent years preparing to fight. The safe contained one final folder marked Emergency Implementation. Inside were step-by-step instructions for activating all elements of the protection. Campaign within 72 hours, transforming decades of quiet preparation into immediate public action. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note in their father's careful script. When the time comes, trust the network. Everything you need has been prepared. The corporate response to the twins' activities came swiftly and aggressively. 3 days after their meeting with the Guardian Network, they found their father's cabin had been broken into during their absence. Nothing appeared stolen, but everything had been systematically searched. File cabinets were rifled through, digital devices examined, and even floorboards pried up to check for hidden compartments. More disturbing were the items left behind. Business cards from security consultants were scattered on the table. A folder containing detailed background information about both brothers, including employment records, financial data, and photographs of their homes, sat prominently displayed. The message was clear. They were being watched, investigated, and intimidated. Among the scattered papers, they discovered a collection of threatening letters that had been sent to various guardians over the past months. The correspondence revealed a pattern of escalating pressure designed to discourage preservation activities through a combination of legal threats, economic pressure, and personal intimidation. Look at the progression, Daniel said, arranging the letters chronologically. It starts with polite requests to cease trespassing on land under corporate survey, then legal warnings about interfering with legitimate business activities. Finally, direct threats about consequences for continued interference. The letters were professionally crafted to stay just within legal boundaries while conveying unmistakable menace. References to accidents that happen in remote wilderness areas and tragic consequences of interfering with heavy equipment. operations left little doubt about the intended message. Marcus found a particularly disturbing letter, addressed to their father personally, sent just weeks before his death. Mr. Thompson, your continued interference with authorized mineral exploration activities has been noted. We strongly advise you to reconsider your involvement in illegal preservation activities before circumstances require more direct action to protect legitimate business interests. The timing was chilling. Their father had received escalating threats during the exact period when his journal entries showed increasing concern about corporate pressure and the need for succession planning. His final entries took on new meaning when read in context of systematic intimidation. They may have killed him, Daniel said quietly. Understanding the implication, the threatening letters revealed that the corporate interests behind the development projects had detailed intelligence about Guardian Network activities. Names of individual guardians, descriptions of their areas of responsibility, even personal information about family members and financial vulnerabilities. The surveillance operation was far more extensive than they'd realized, but most troubling were letters targeting the twins specifically, sent to their employers and neighbors even before they'd inherited the cabin. Corporate investigators had been monitoring their activities from the moment their father's will became public, preparing to neutralize potential successors before they could organize effective opposition. They know we're here. They know what we're planning, and they're trying to eliminate us before we can implement Dad's protection strategy, Marcus said, examining surveillance photographs that showed them hiking along their father's trail system. The intimidation campaign wasn't limited to threats. Economic pressure was being applied to anyone connected to preservation efforts. Guardian Network members were losing consulting contracts, facing harassment from regulatory agencies, and discovering that permits for their legitimate businesses were being delayed or denied. Sarah Whitehorse had been fired from her part-time position with the forest service after 30 years of exemplary service, officially for budget constraints, but actually for her Guardian activities. Tom Brightfeather's cultural education programs were suddenly facing funding cuts and regulatory challenges. Dr. Santos found her university consulting agreements cancelled without explanation. They're trying to destroy the network by eliminating our ability to earn livelihoods, Daniel realized. Reading termination letters that used barely concealed pretexts to punish preservation activities. The psychological pressure was equally systematic. Corporate investigators had compiled detailed profiles of each Guardian's personal vulnerabilities, then crafted specific intimidation strategies designed to exploit individual fears and concerns. Elderly Guardians received health insurance threats. Those with families faced suggestions that their children might be at risk. Financial pressure was applied to anyone with mortgages or business loans, but the threatening letters also revealed something important about their opponents. The corporate interests were concerned enough about the preservation campaign to invest significant resources in intelligence gathering and intimidation. That suggested the legal and political strategies their father had developed posed genuine threats to development projects. If we weren't effective, they wouldn't be trying so hard to stop us, Marcus said, finding correspondence that showed corporate legal teams were genuinely worried about potential court challenges and regulatory delays. The letters contained inadvertent admissions that development permits had been obtained through incomplete environmental assessments and inadequate cultural impact reviews. Corporate lawyers were advising their clients to accelerate construction timelines specifically to create irreversible facts before preservation challenges could be mounted effectively. They know their permits are vulnerable, Daniel realized. That's why they're trying to eliminate opposition through intimidation rather than fighting us in court. The twins understood they were now targets in a conflict that had already claimed their father, its life, and was systematically destroying the network he'd spent decades building. Rather than being intimidated by the corporate threats, The twins decided to accelerate their father's strategy by reaching out to the academic researchers who had been secretly supporting the preservation effort. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an archaeoastronomer from the University of Colorado, arrived at the cabin within days of their call, bringing with her a portfolio of scientific studies that would transform the public understanding of the threatened sites. Her research documentation was extraordinary, representing 5 years of collaboration with their father to validate the astronomical significance of the ancient observation network. Peer-reviewed papers published in prestigious academic journals confirmed that the stone calendar systems were capable of predicting celestial events with accuracy, rivaling modern computer calculations. Your father provided access to sites that revolutionized our understanding of pre-Columbian astronomy in North America, Dr. Rodriguez explained, showing them research papers that had been deliberately kept low profile to avoid attracting unwanted attention. The mathematical sophistication preserved at these locations challenges fundamental assumptions about indigenous scientific knowledge. The research portfolio contained studies that addressed every aspect of the site's significance. Archaeological dating confirmed that some observation platforms had been in continuous use for over 8 centuries. Astronomical analysis demonstrated that ancient calculations could predict rare events like planetary alignments and eclipse cycles with remarkable precision. Cultural studies documented ongoing traditional knowledge that connected contemporary tribal communities to the sites. This isn't just historical preservation, Dr. Rodriguez emphasized. These sites represent active, scientific installations that could contribute to modern astronomical research if properly protected and studied. The twins learned that their father had been coordinating with researchers at institutions across the country to build an overwhelming scientific case for protection. Papers were being prepared for simultaneous publication in journals ranging from Archaeology Magazine to Astrophysical Journal, creating a coordinated academic assault that would make ignoring the site's significance impossible. Dr. Rodriguez brought preliminary results from ground-penetrating radar surveys that revealed extensive underground features at several sites. The technology had detected stone chambers, carefully constructed sightlines, and complex structural elements that had been invisible to surface observation. We're only beginning to understand the full scope of what these ancient astronomers created, she said, showing 3-dimensional imaging that revealed sophisticated engineering beneath seemingly simple stone arrangements. Destroying these sites before completing scientific documentation would be an irreversible loss to human knowledge. The research documentation included collaboration with indigenous scholars who possessed traditional knowledge about the site's original purposes and continued cultural significance. Dr. Joseph Crow, Feather from the University of New Mexico, had been working with tribal elders to reconstruct historical astronomical practices that were still remembered in oral traditions. The ancient knowledge isn't lost, Dr. Rodriguez explained, showing recordings of tribal elders describing traditional star-watching practices. It's been preserved in communities that maintained connections to these sites across centuries. The combination of archaeological evidence with living cultural knowledge creates an unprecedented opportunity for comprehensive understanding, but the scientific evidence also revealed how much was at immediate risk of permanent loss. Climate change was affecting the stone calendar systems as shifting weather patterns altered the atmospheric conditions necessary for precise astronomical observation. Light pollution from expanding development was compromising the dark sky conditions that made the sites functional. Most critically, the proposed mining operations would destroy features that had taken centuries to develop and could never be reconstructed. Ancient stone alignments required precise positioning that depended on local topography and horizon features. Even minor disturbances could eliminate the astronomical functions that made the sites scientifically valuable. Once these calculations tools are destroyed, the knowledge they preserve is gone forever, Dr. Rodriguez said, showing computer models that demonstrated how mining operations would eliminate sight lines and destroy calibrated observation platforms. It would be like burning the Library of Alexandria while claiming the books weren't important because we hadn't finished reading them. The research portfolio included letters of support from scientific institutions worldwide, recognizing the global significance of the threatened sites. The International Astronomical Union had passed a resolution supporting protection efforts. Archaeological societies from 6 countries had endorsed preservation proposals. Indigenous rights organizations had documented cultural connections that extended across tribal boundaries. Your father created the foundation for establishing these sites as UNESCO World Heritage locations, Dr. Rodriguez revealed, showing preliminary applications that had been prepared for international protection status. The scientific documentation meets every criterion for recognition as irreplaceable human heritage. The twins realized that implementing their father's protection strategy meant releasing scientific information that would fundamentally change how the sites were understood by academic communities, government agencies, and the general public. The research their father had helped coordinate provided overwhelming evidence that corporate development would destroy resources of incalculable scientific and cultural value. We have 48 hours to submit this documentation before the mining permits become final, Dr. Rodriguez said, checking regulatory deadlines. Once we release the research, there's no going back. The sites will become international symbols of the conflict between scientific preservation and commercial exploitation. With time running out before the permit deadlines, the twins decided to make one final journey to the most significant site on their father's map, a location he had marked simply as primary, but never fully described in his journals. Dr. Rodriguez joined them for the ascent, bringing sophisticated astronomical equipment to document the site's capabilities before the legal battle began. The trail to primary led beyond any of the established routes they'd followed, requiring technical climbing equipment and advanced mountaineering skills. Their father's final map showed the location at the highest accessible point in the region, requiring a 2-day approach through terrain that challenged even experienced alpinists. On the cliff face leading to the site, they discovered an ancient marker unlike anything they'd seen before. Carved into the granite was a stone pointer the size of a gravestone, its surface covered with astronomical calculations so complex that Dr. Rodriguez needed several hours to begin understanding their significance. "This isn't just marking direction," she said, photographing the intricate mathematical notations that covered every surface of the stone marker. It's providing calculation methods for determining precise astronomical coordinates from this exact location. The precision is extraordinary. The marker's calculations took into account atmospheric refraction, seasonal variations in Earth's axial tilt, even the slow precession of stellar positions across centuries. The mathematical sophistication indicated knowledge that had required generations of careful observation and theoretical development. Whoever created this understood astronomy at a level that wouldn't be matched by European science for centuries after contact, Dr. Rodriguez explained, running her fingers along calculation symbols that had been carved with obsessive precision. This represents one of the most advanced astronomical calculation systems ever discovered in North America. Following the stone pointer's direction, they reached primary just as afternoon clouds began building over the peaks. The site was breathtaking in its scope and sophistication. A natural granite platform the size of a basketball court had been enhanced with stone alignments, observation points, and calculation tools that created a comprehensive astronomical observatory. But what made primary truly extraordinary was its positioning. The site sat at the exact center of the network of observation points they'd visited throughout their journey. Sightlines extended in all directions to horizons marked by the subsidiary sites, creating a master observation platform that could coordinate astronomical observations across hundreds of square miles. "It's a command center," Dr. Rodriguez said in amazement, setting up her modern instruments and comparing their readings to the ancient calculation tools. "The other sites are specialized for specific types of observation, but this location can monitor everything simultaneously." The twins spent the afternoon learning to use Primary's sophisticated astronomical tools under Dr. Rodriguez's guidance. Stone alignments marked the rising and setting points of significant stars throughout the year. Calculation wheels carved into the granite provided methods for determining precise timing of celestial events. Shadow markers enabled accurate measurement of solar angles and seasonal progressions. Most remarkably, the site included features that had been invisible from ground level but became apparent when viewed from Primary's elevated position. The subsidiary observation sites were positioned to form geometric patterns that could be seen from the master platform, creating visual confirmation that the entire network was functioning properly. The ancient astronomers could coordinate observations across the entire region from this single location. Dr. Rodriguez explained, using modern surveying equipment to confirm the precision of the ancient alignments. "It's like a prehistoric mission control center for astronomical research." As evening approached, they experienced Primary's full capabilities. The site provided optimal viewing conditions for celestial phenomena that were partially obscured or poorly positioned at lower elevations. Mountain weather patterns created atmospheric conditions that enhanced star visibility during specific seasons. Most importantly, the site's positioning allowed simultaneous observation of astronomical events that could only be partially seen from individual locations. "This is why your father spent 40 years protecting the network," Dr. Rodriguez said, watching sunset illuminate stone alignments that marked stellar positions with remarkable accuracy. Losing any individual site would be significant, but losing Primary would eliminate the coordination center that makes the entire system functional. They discovered that their father had been using Primary for his most important astronomical observations, maintaining centuries-old traditions while documenting them with modern scientific methods. His final journal entries about the site revealed understanding that had taken decades to develop. "The responsibility is overwhelming," Marcus read from their father's final notes about Primary. "This place represents the pinnacle of human astronomical achievement in pre-Columbian America. The knowledge preserved here could revolutionize our understanding of indigenous science. But protecting it requires sacrifices that will change our lives forever." As darkness fell over the mountains, the twins understood they stood at the climax of their father's life work. Tomorrow, they would return to implement his protection strategy, transforming quiet guardianship into public confrontation with forces that had already demonstrated their willingness to use violence to achieve their goals. The stone pointer seemed to glow in the starlight, marking not just astronomical coordinates, but the moment when they would accept full responsibility for preserving something irreplaceable. The legal hearing that would determine the fate of the astronomical sites took place in the federal courthouse in Denver, with standing room only as supporters and opponents packed the gallery. The twins sat at the plaintiff's table with environmental lawyers, while corporate representatives filled the opposite side with an army of attorneys and technical experts. Judge Patricia Hawkins presided over proceedings that had attracted national media attention following the public release of the scientific documentation. The morning news had featured Dr. Rodriguez's research revealing the extraordinary astronomical capabilities of the threatened sites, transforming what had seemed like a routine mining permit approval into a high-profile, confrontation over cultural preservation. The corporate legal team's opening argument attempted to minimize the significance of the archaeological discoveries, characterizing them as interesting historical curiosities that shouldn't interfere with legitimate economic development. Their expert witnesses argued that modern astronomical research had made ancient observation methods obsolete, reducing the sites to mere tourist attractions. Rather than functional scientific installations, these stone arrangements represent primitive attempts at astronomy that have no relevance to contemporary scientific understanding, testified Dr. Harrison Wells, a corporate consultant who had never visited the sites in person. Preserving them would prevent productive use of valuable mineral resources while providing no meaningful scientific benefit. But the preservation team's presentation systematically demolished the corporate arguments. Dr. Rodriguez testified about the mathematical sophistication of the ancient calculations, demonstrating how they could predict astronomical events with accuracy that rivaled modern computer models. Her evidence included live demonstrations using replica calculation tools that proved the site's continued functionality. These aren't historical artifacts, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the packed courtroom. They're working scientific instruments that have been operating continuously for centuries and continue to provide valuable astronomical data today. The twins presented their father's decades of documentation, showing how the observation network had been used for ongoing research that contributed to scientific understanding of ancient astronomical knowledge. Marcus described the systematic weather monitoring that had provided crucial data for climate change research in alpine environments. Daniel testified about the cultural significance of the sites, reading statements from tribal elders who described traditional astronomical practices that connected contemporary indigenous communities to centuries-old scientific traditions. The testimony established legal standing for cultural protection arguments that carried significant weight in federal courts. But the hearing's most dramatic moment came when the twins presented a document they had discovered among their father's papers, an original land survey from 1883 that explicitly protected astronomical observation sites from mineral extraction under territorial preservation agreements. The historical survey document had been misfiled in government archives for over a century, but their father's legal research had located it in records that predated statehood. The survey established that the astronomical sites had been granted formal protection status that legally superseded subsequent mining claims. The sites were protected by territorial law before Colorado achieved statehood, testified legal historian Dr. Amanda Foster, examining the century-old document under courtroom magnification. The preservation agreements were incorporated into state law during the Constitutional Convention, giving them continuing legal force. Corporate lawyers scrambled to challenge the historical documents' authenticity and legal relevance, but their arguments appeared increasingly desperate as the preservation team systematically validated both the survey's legitimacy and its legal implications. The mining permits had been issued in violation of existing protective statutes that government agencies had simply forgotten existed. Judge Hawkins recessed the proceedings to allow both sides time to research the legal implications of the historical survey. During the break, corporate representatives approached the twins with settlement offers that would have provided significant financial compensation in exchange for withdrawing their legal challenges. We're prepared to offer substantial payments for cooperation with development and planning, the lead corporate attorney explained during private negotiations. The mining project can proceed with minimal site disturbance if you're willing to work with us rather than against us. But the twins rejected all settlement offers, understanding that any compromise would result in the gradual destruction of the astronomical network their father had spent his life protecting. The scientific and cultural significance of the sites was too important to sacrifice for financial compensation. When proceedings resumed, Judge Hawkins announced her preliminary ruling based on the historical survey evidence. The 1883 preservation agreements provided clear legal protection for the astronomical sites that remained valid under current law. Mining permits issued without considering. These protective statutes were legally invalid and would be suspended pending comprehensive environmental and cultural impact reviews. The evidence presented demonstrates that these sites possess extraordinary scientific and cultural significance that merits protection under both historical preservation laws and contemporary environmental statutes. Judge Hawkins declared to the packed courtroom, no economic benefit from mineral extraction could justify destroying irreplaceable scientific and cultural resources of this magnitude. The corporate legal team immediately announced their intention to appeal the ruling, but the preliminary injunction would prevent any development activities while appeals proceeded through higher courts. The astronomical sites had one crucial legal protection that would preserve them during the extended legal battle ahead. 6 months after the initial court victory, the twins stood before a crowd of several hundred people gathered at the ancient stone calendar site for the formal dedication ceremony. The federal government had designated the entire astronomical observation network as a national scientific monument, providing permanent protection under laws that would prevent any future development threats. The ceremony began with readings from the official protection decree that established the sites as irreplaceable, scientific and cultural resources deserving the highest level of preservation. Representatives from the National Park Service, Smithsonian Institution, and UNESCO attended the dedication, recognizing the international significance of the preserved astronomical knowledge. The network of observation sites preserved through the dedication of Robert Thompson and the Guardian network represents one of the most sophisticated astronomical installations ever discovered in North America, announced Dr. Sarah Martinez, the newly appointed director of the monument. Their protection ensures that future generations will have access to scientific and cultural knowledge that spans centuries of human observation and calculation. The formal protection status had been achieved through the coordinated implementation of their father's comprehensive strategy. Legal challenges based on historical preservation agreements had established definitive protection. Scientific documentation had demonstrated the site's extraordinary research value. Cultural testimony from tribal communities had confirmed ongoing religious and traditional significance. Political pressure from environmental organizations had ensured government support for permanent preservation. But beyond the legal victory, the twins had discovered the deeper purpose behind their father's 40-year mission. The Guardian Network had evolved into a formal organization with government recognition and funding support. What had begun as informal preservation efforts by dedicated individuals had become an official program for protecting astronomical heritage sites. Across the mountain west, Tom Brightfeather spoke during the dedication ceremony about the cultural significance of preserving traditional astronomical knowledge. These sites maintained connections between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. They remind us that careful observation of natural patterns provides knowledge that remains valuable across centuries of human development. Dr. Rodriguez, now serving as the monument's chief scientist, described ongoing research programs that would use the protected sites for studies ranging from historical astronomy to climate change impacts on alpine environments. University partnerships had been established to ensure continued scientific use while maintaining preservation priorities. Your father understood that protection and research must work together, she told the twins during the ceremony. The sites remain functional scientific installations while receiving the legal protection necessary to preserve them for future generations. The twins had formally accepted positions as the monument's first guardian directors. acknowledging both their inheritance of responsibility and their commitment to continuing the preservation work their father had initiated. The roles provided salaries and official authority to coordinate protection activities across the entire network. Marcus addressed the dedication crowd about the personal transformation the experience had created. We inherited more than property when our father passed away. We inherited understanding of how individual dedication can preserve irreplaceable knowledge for the benefit of all humanity. Daniel spoke about lessons learned through the preservation campaign. The opposition we faced taught us that commercial interests will destroy anything that cannot be immediately converted into profit. But it also showed us that committed people working together can protect resources that have value beyond economic calculation. The dedication ceremony included traditional astronomical observations conducted using the ancient calculation methods preserved at the sites. As evening fell, tribal elders guided visitors through star-watching practices that had been maintained for centuries, demonstrating the continuing functionality of the prehistoric observation tools. Sarah Whitehorse, now serving as the monument's community liaison coordinator, had organized participation from Guardian Network members across the region. The informal preservation organization had evolved into a recognized component of the official protection program, maintaining the grassroots dedication that had made the original preservation possible. The network your father built proved that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they commit themselves to protecting what matters, she told the twins as the ceremony concluded. His legacy isn't just the sites we preserved, but the understanding that each generation must accept responsibility for maintaining what previous generations created. The Protection Decree established educational programs that would bring students and researchers to study the astronomical sites while ensuring that access remained limited and carefully managed. The balance between preservation and education reflected their father's vision of sites that remained functional while serving broader educational purposes. As the dedication crowd dispersed, under star-filled skies, the twins remained at the stone calendar site where their journey had begun. The ancient astronomical tools continued their centuries-old function, marking time and celestial patterns with precision that honored both traditional knowledge and contemporary scientific understanding. He knew we'd understand eventually, Marcus said, watching planetary alignments that the stone calendar had predicted with perfect accuracy. Daniel nodded, understanding how their father's patient preparation had created not just legal protection for the sites, but personal transformation for his sons. They had inherited more than responsibility. They had discovered purposes that would define the rest of their lives. 1 year after the monument's establishment, the twins had settled into their roles as guardian directors, discovering that protecting the astronomical sites required skills their father had spent decades developing. The transition from inheriting responsibility to actively fulfilling it had brought challenges and rewards they never could have anticipated. Their father's cabin had been converted into the monument's field research station, where visiting scientists could access his 40 years of documentation while conducting their own studies. The wall still displayed his original maps and astronomical charts, but now they were supplemented with modern computer terminals and digital databases that made the accumulated knowledge accessible to researchers worldwide. Marcus had developed expertise in the legal and administrative aspects of monument management, working with government agencies to secure ongoing funding and regulatory protection. The bureaucratic complexities of federal preservation programs required constant attention to ensure that protection remained effective despite changing political pressures. Dad's legal research provided the foundation, but maintaining protection requires ongoing vigilance, Marcus explained to a group of new Guardian recruits during their monthly training session. Every budget cycle, every policy change, Every personnel transition creates opportunities for corporate interests to resume their attacks on preservation. Programs. Daniel had focused on the scientific and educational components of monument operations, coordinating research programs that use the astronomical sites for studies ranging from ancient astronomy to contemporary climate research. University partnerships had produced a steady stream of scientific papers that validated the site's continuing research value, the ancient observation. Methods provide baseline data that helps us understand environmental changes spanning centuries, Daniel told the recruits, demonstrating calculation techniques using replica stone tools. Modern instruments record precise measurements, but the prehistoric calculations show us long-term patterns that would otherwise be invisible. The Guardian network had expanded significantly, with formal training programs that taught preservation techniques to volunteers throughout the Mountain West. Many recruits were inspired by the twins' story, understanding that ordinary people could make extraordinary contributions to protecting irreplaceable cultural and scientific resources. Among the new recruits was Jennifer Martinez, a graduate student in archaeoastronomy whose master's thesis focused on the mathematical sophistication preserved at the monument sites. She had discovered calculation methods that even Dr. Rodriguez hadn't fully understood, revealing additional layers of knowledge encoded in the ancient stone arrangements. Every time we think we've completely documented these sites, someone discovers new capabilities, Jennifer explained during a research presentation. The prehistoric astronomers embedded multiple calculation systems in the same stone arrangements, creating tools that served different functions depending on how they were used. The twins had also discovered that their father's succession planning extended beyond simply passing responsibility to them. Hidden among his papers were detailed profiles of potential future guardians, people he had identified as having the dedication and capabilities necessary to continue preservation work across multiple generations. Tom Brightfeather's grandson, Alex, had joined the program after completing military service, bringing technical skills that enhanced the monument's security and communication capabilities. His cultural knowledge combined with modern expertise created new possibilities for preserving traditional astronomical practices while adapting to contemporary conditions. Sarah Whitehorse's daughter, Dr. Rebecca Whitehorse, had returned from completing her PhD in environmental law to serve as the monument's legal counsel. Her specialization in indigenous rights and cultural preservation provided crucial expertise for protecting sites that had both scientific and spiritual significance. Your father understood that preservation required building institutions that could survive individual lifespans. Sarah told the twins during a strategy planning session. The network he created was designed to regenerate itself by training new generations of dedicated guardians. The monument's success had inspired similar preservation efforts in other regions, with guardian networks developing around astronomical sites throughout the American West. The organizational model their father had pioneered was being adapted to protect sites ranging from ancient solar calendars to historic observatories. The twins had begun teaching advanced guardian training courses that shared the preservation techniques their father had developed over decades of experience. The curriculum included everything from legal strategies for challenging development, threats to practical skills for maintaining remote monitoring equipment. The most rewarding aspect of their work was discovering the continuing functionality of the preserved sites. The astronomical observation network remained as accurate as ever, providing predictions and calculations that supported both traditional cultural practices and contemporary scientific research. During the monthly succession planning journal they had begun maintaining, following their father's example, Marcus wrote, "The responsibility grows heavier, but also more meaningful with each passing season. We understand now that guardianship isn't about preventing change, but about ensuring that valuable knowledge survives long enough to benefit future generations. Daniel added his own reflection. The sites choose their guardians as much as we choose them. Every person who commits to this work discovers capabilities they didn't know they possessed, just as we discovered purposes we never could have imagined before inheriting Dad's legacy. The succession planning journal would eventually guide the next generation of guardians, continuing the cycle of responsibility that their father had initiated and they had learned to fulfill. 5 years after inheriting their father's cabin, Marcus and Daniel stood once again in the small clearing where their journey had begun. The log structure remained unchanged, but their understanding of its significance had been transformed completely. What had once seemed like a simple mountain retreat now served as the symbolic heart of a preservation movement that had spread across the American West. The morning sun illuminated a bronze memorial plaque mounted beside the cabin's front door, honoring their father's contribution to protecting irreplaceable scientific and cultural heritage. The inscription read, "Robert Thompson, Guardian 1980-2020. He understood that some knowledge is too precious to lose and some places too sacred to destroy." Inside the cabin, the walls still displayed their father's original maps and astronomical charts, but now they served as historical documentation of the systematic approach that had made preservation possible. Visiting researchers from universities worldwide came to study not just the astronomical sites themselves, but the methodology their father had developed for documenting and protecting them. He left us more than an inheritance, Daniel reflected, running his fingers along the carved symbols that had first captured their attention years earlier. He left us a blueprint for how dedicated individuals can preserve what institutions ignore or corporations would destroy. Marcus nodded, understanding how their personal transformation mirrored the broader success of the preservation movement. We thought we were just inheriting property, but we were actually inheriting purpose. The difference between those two things has defined everything that followed. The memorial plaque had been dedicated during a ceremony that brought together the extended guardian network their father had built. Representatives from tribal councils, university research programs, environmental organizations, and government agencies had gathered to honor someone whose quiet dedication had created lasting protection for irreplaceable knowledge. Dr. Rodriguez, now directing a major research institute focused on ancient astronomy, had spoken during the memorial service about their father's unique contribution to scientific understanding. Robert Thompson demonstrated that the most important discoveries aren't always made in laboratories or published in academic journals. Sometimes they're preserved by people who simply refuse to let valuable knowledge disappear. The twins had established an annual pilgrimage to the cabin for Guardian Network members, creating a tradition that honored their father's memory while reinforcing the commitment that sustained preservation work. Each year, participants hiked the trail system their father had maintained, visited the astronomical sites he had protected, and renewed their dedication to continuing his mission. During this year's pilgrimage, they had guided a group that included both longtime guardians and new recruits, sharing stories about their father's work while teaching practical skills for site maintenance and protection. The continuity between generations had become the foundation for long-term preservation success. As evening approached, the twins prepared to make their own annual journey to the primary observation site, where they would conduct astronomical observations using the ancient calculation methods their father had taught them to preserve. The ritual connected them both to his memory and to the centuries of observers who had maintained these traditions before him. "The responsibility continues," Marcus said, shouldering the pack that had once belonged to their father and now carried the tools necessary for maintaining the observation network. Daniel picked up the succession journal they had been keeping, documenting their own experiences for the guardians, who would eventually inherit their responsibilities. But now we understand what he meant when he wrote that the sites choose their guardians. This work chooses people who are ready to dedicate their lives to something larger than themselves. They walked toward the trailhead as stars began appearing in the darkening sky above, following the same path their father had taken for 40 years. Behind them, the cabin stood as a monument to one man's quiet determination to preserve irreplaceable knowledge for future generations. Above them, the ancient stone calendar continued its centuries-old function of marking time and celestial patterns with mathematical precision that honored both traditional wisdom and contemporary scientific understanding. The knowledge their father had protected would continue serving humanity long after his sons had passed the guardian responsibility to the next generation. The circle of preservation. Dedication and succession would continue as long as people understood that some things are worth protecting, regardless of the personal cost required to preserve them.